Hello all, welcome to the Safe at School Back to School workshop presented by the American Diabetes Association. My name is Emma and I'm the Legal Advocacy Fellow at the ADA. Thanks for joining me today as we discuss the rights of college students with diabetes and go over everything you need to know before you're either going through the application process, starting your first year of college, or coming back for another semester. I've had type 1 diabetes myself for over 14 years and went through the college process with diabetes in grad school. I also went to a college out of state, pretty far away from my family. So I understand this can be a big life change, especially when you add diabetes into the mix. Before we begin, I want to let you know that we're going to be recording this session, and a link to the recording will be available on our website as well as our social media platforms. Second, the information you receive today from the ADA does not constitute legal or medical advice. For legal advice or representation, contact and consult an independent attorney, and for healthcare consultation and advice, consult with your professional healthcare provider. Also, as you're watching this presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. So a little bit about what we do. The ADA's legal advocacy team seeks to end diabetes discrimination, and we use a four-step model: educate, negotiate, litigate, and legislate. Our focus areas include schools, and this includes, like today, college and post-secondary institutions, childcare and camps, employment settings, places of public accommodation, and this is things like the airport, malls, amusement parks, and other public places. And then finally, detention settings. We provide resources and information on our website regarding legal rights and discrimination in each of these settings. So much of the information in today's presentation is also available in our newly published Going to College with Diabetes Self-Advocacy Guide. So we encourage you to check that out as well. So this guide provides more in-depth information about your legal rights and your college's legal obligations. There's also strategies and tips for working with your college to get reasonable modifications and accommodations you may need for diabetes or other disabilities, as well as practical tips to help manage your diabetes in a new environment, because we know college can be a big change and jump to independence. Finally, there's also some sample letters and materials that can be useful for communicating with your college, such as a sample letter of accommodation that can help you know what to expect during this process. This guide is all in a question and answer format for the most part, so we hope it's helpful. If you have specific questions, you can just go to that question to answer it. And of course, you can always contact the American Diabetes Association directly. So how is college different than high school? College is obviously different than high school in a lot of ways. For one, this might be the first time you're living by yourself. It might be the first time you're responsible in charge of creating your own schedule. And also the first time you have this new level of independence. And then on top of that, diabetes care, specifically in terms of like accommodation, support from your school, or your personal management might look different. So in high school, you might have had what is called a Section 504 plan, or an individualized education program, also called an IEP. And this might have laid out the responsibilities of your school and the diabetes care you need. Most schools are required to provide a nurse or trained diabetes personnel to provide diabetes care as needed. So even you might have had a level of independence in high school with caring for your diabetes, but there was likely still some sort of staff who were trained in diabetes management, such as glucagon administration. Your parent or guardian might have also been the one who was the point person and primarily responsible for setting up accommodations like a Section 504 plan. They might have been the ones answering the phone calls, filling out the paperwork, and attending the meetings for check-ins. Someone else at the school, likely like a school staff member, might have been responsible for setting up testing accommodations, or if you had a quiz, notifying teachers about what you need, and also educating or training school staff on like the diabetes basics. So college is a bit different. For one, colleges typically don't use the terminology Section 504 plan or IEPs for accommodations and what's provided. Instead, you might receive what's called a letter of accommodation. This letter of accommodation might also look different. It might be a lot shorter than a Section 504 plan or IEP because, for one, colleges don't have quite the same responsibilities to provide care and services as your high school might have. Colleges do need to provide reasonable accommodations, but only if requested. So this is important, especially as for incoming students, to know that you're the one who's responsible to find your disability service office or whoever's in charge and let the school know what you need and make that request. They won't come and find you. Colleges are generally not required to train staff to provide diabetes care, so you must be able to provide it independently. So this can look like in the dorm room. They're not required to train generally like a RA on glucagon administration, but of course, and personally, always feel free to, if you want to educate trusted friends, trusted RA, or a trusted professor on the diabetes basics and emergency procedures. That's always encouraged and something I definitely did when I first got to college. Finally, colleges generally cannot communicate with your parents or guardians without your permission, so you're the one who's in charge of doing this and should be the one who's contacting the offices, contacting your professors, and doing this by yourself. Knowing your rights is the first step. We think this is an important step in not only protecting yourself, but being prepared so you can take on all of these changes that are coming up. So the primary laws that protect college students with diabetes are the Americans with Disabilities Act and or Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, depending on what college you're at. The Americans with Disability Act does not apply to religious schools, but Section 504 applies if they receive some sort of federal funding. And most religiously affiliated colleges receive some amount of federal funding in some way. So again, most college students with diabetes should be protected by one of these anti-discrimination laws. And regardless of how you personally identify as a person with diabetes, diabetes is a disability under federal law, which is good because this grants you those protections. Students with diabetes are protected because under the ADA in Section 504, a disability must substantially limit a major life activity. And in the case of diabetes, that major life activity is endocrine function. So under those laws that we just discussed, covered colleges need to provide equal access to educational opportunities without discriminating against people with disabilities. This includes extracurriculars, so if you're a student athlete or in college-sponsored clubs or other programming. You are entitled to request reasonable modifications and accommodations so you have equal access to educational opportunities, but do know that colleges aren't required to provide modifications that would either have an undue burden or fundamentally alter a program. So this looks like a college doesn't have to grant a modification or accommodation that would lower a minimum GPA requirement or assignments you must complete to successfully finish a program. But the good thing is for most accommodations related to diabetes, they can often be imposed at little to no cost and without changing academic standards. So this is often not an issue. So if you are going through the admissions and application process, congratulations. But here's a few things you should know. Generally, a college cannot ask you about your diabetes or if you have a disability during the admission or recruitment process, so they can't ask any questions related to this during the interview. However, you can choose to disclose it personally. There's not a right or wrong answer. This is completely personal. I decided to do this while I was doing some interviews and in a personal statement because diabetes related to a lot of my academic interest, and it was the explanation of why I was passionate about the program I was selecting. But again, there's not a right or wrong answer. Additionally, your high school shouldn't be disclosing you have diabetes, especially the existence of an IEP or Section 504 plan to any colleges you're applying to or attending. And even after you get admitted to a college, you don't have to disclose you have diabetes or any other disability. But of course, as we're going to lay out, there are advantages to do so, with one of the biggest ones being receiving accommodations and requesting accommodations. There's also some safety advantages. It can be a good thing at times to disclose you have diabetes and educate people, especially like a trusted coach or professor or your roommates. So in academics and college activities, here's what some of your rights can look like. You have a right to request accommodations for academics like coursework and college-sponsored activity. Accommodations are granted and determined on an individualized basis. So this means not every student will have the same plan. You might have friends with diabetes who are in college and they might tell you what their accommodations are, but no, yours might not look exactly the same. And colleges, again, as I mentioned earlier, are only required to make reasonable changes to give students an opportunity to fully meet expectations. So you have to fully meet academic standards and your course requirements. And a little bit more about how accommodations are on an individualized basis. A good example I like to give is when I was in college, a lot of people have to take maybe a chemistry lab or a biology lab. And a common accommodation that I received was having food or drink with me at all times in a classroom. This might have to be adjusted slightly, like in a chemistry lab. You can't necessarily have a juice box next to dangerous chemicals. So you might have to have some sort of accommodation that allows you to step outside and keep your food as close as possible if you need to treat your blood sugar. So here's some other common examples of accommodations in academics and in the classroom setting, but remember that this is all individualized. Permission to eat or drink in the classroom setting or during exams. Having access to diabetes technology, like if you have an insulin pump or a continuous glucose monitor, as well as Wi-Fi at all times. This might be adjusted if there's like a secure exam. So having access to your diabetes technology without Wi-Fi access. Also, an accommodation to pause a test or exam or extended breaks between sections of an exam, as well as performing your diabetes care in class. Some terminology you should be aware of that might come up as you're seeking accommodations for testing, is you might hear the words stop the clock or extended time. That just stop the clock is just the same as like pausing a test and then restarting the time once you treat your blood glucose. And then extended time is when the accommodation a college uses is looking like giving 25 or 50% extra time to take an exam. So that way, if something does happen and you have to treat blood glucose, then the time is built in. So those are just some different terminology you might hear and however your college does it. So in other settings, like the dorm room, here's a few examples that some people receive. One is having a refrigerator in your room or being allowed to have your own refrigerator to store insulin and other medications, having access to a clean and private space if desired for your care, having a housing equipped with air conditioning or housing close to food services or a cafeteria. One tip I'll add for a refrigerator is, especially if you have roommates, it's good to have a conversation with your roommates early on, explaining that you have diabetes, especially if you're sharing a fridge. You want to make sure that they know that your insulin is off limits and needs to stay in a specific part of the fridge. Sometimes those small fridges can get extra cold in the back, so you want to make sure your roommates understand your needs so everybody can respect them. So you're also entitled to reasonable accommodations during things like clinics. Maybe you're a nursing student and have clinics for that, campus jobs, internships, other work settings. You should know that there might be a separate process to seek accommodations for clinics or campus jobs. And there would also be a different process if you're getting an off-campus job that would likely not be through it would likely not be through your college to seek that accommodation. A reasonable accommodation might be something like having access to your smart device for medical purposes. Your disability service office should be able to help you, especially if you're enrolled in it's like a clinic or college-sponsored internship, and figuring out the process and what this looks like. You should also just be aware of outside exams, like professional licensing exams. Maybe you're going to grad school or medical school, so you're going to take the MCAT, LSAT, GRE. These are generally conducted through outside agencies, and you can seek accommodations to ensure access to your diabetes supplies like insulin, food, and drink, but this is usually through a separate process. It's always recommended to start early because they may have their own paperwork requirements and documentation, and you want to make sure you give yourself enough time to apply for accommodations before the test occurs, because sometimes it can take a few months. And a common question we get is about study abroad. First, I want to say that study abroad is a great opportunity, and lots of people with diabetes study abroad successfully. I did a spring break study abroad trip, and it was a great experience to move in your program and learn something new. And you can definitely do it with diabetes. It is recommended that you work with your disability service office to set up accommodations with the study abroad program or discuss what that might look like. There might be different requirements, forms you have to fill out, or country-specific considerations. This might especially be true if the study abroad opportunity is not directly through your university. But typically, Disability Services Office or your study abroad office has experienced this before, so can help guide you through the process. And finally, is for a legal overview is privacy laws. You should know that some laws like the ADA, Section 504, and FERPA might restrict your college's ability to share information about you with other parties, and this includes your parents. So if you want to ensure your college can communicate with your family, especially maybe during emergency settings, list them as an emergency contact and provide the proper consent. You'll probably get some forms or document about this early on before you start school, but make sure you keep an eye out for the emergency contact. So now that we've gone over the basic legal rights, what comes next? How do you advocate for yourself? So the first step is finding your disability services office. It might go by a different name, but it'll probably be something similar to that, maybe accommodations office. So that's the first step. And the college disability services are generally responsible for helping establish accommodations. They may assist connecting students with related resources, or can help students contact their college departments or their residential life office if problems arise, if there's conflict. And they can also work with you and have regular meetings with you to see if your plan is working for you and how you're doing in college. An important thing to know is accommodations are not retroactive, so the sooner you request them, the better. You might enter college thinking you have things under control and you don't need accommodations. You think your professors are understanding, but you never know what can come up. As we all know, diabetes can be very unpredictable, and since accommodations don't go backwards for the most part, so having them established in case can be very important. So the next step is documentation. This is very important. It'll be your responsibility to provide the required documentation to your college to support your need for accommodations and modifications. Once you go to your disability services office, they should let you know what documents they need, so you can start gathering them. This will probably include like a doctor's letter, which would have a diagnosis of your diabetes and symptoms, an explanation of how diabetes is a disability, and a request for specific accommodations with a clear rationale for why this is appropriate for your scenario. We do have a sample letter in the ADA's college guide we encourage you to use and share with your healthcare provider. One tip I have, and something that's helped me a lot, is make sure to keep all your accommodations related and diabetes paperwork in one folder, whether that's on your computer or if you like to have things in person. You might need this later on for things like future jobs. Maybe you're going to apply to grad school and have to take an exam one day, or do future internships. When I applied for law school, I realized I needed all this paperwork again to do the process. And it took a lot of digging because I did not do that at the beginning. So if you can keep everything from the beginning, it makes it a lot easier for the future. So once you have found your disability services office and you have all that paperwork, you'll likely schedule an appointment with an officer in your school's disability office or staff member. Bring all this documentation and be prepared to have a conversation with the officer about your needs and appropriate accommodations. There may be some back and forth. The college may come back and say what accommodations they believe you need, and if you disagree, maybe we might need to provide additional documentation and be prepared to advocate for yourself. So just be prepared to know how to communicate why your request is reasonable and appropriate. But eventually, after you have those meetings and decide on finalizing the accommodations, your college should provide students with disability services and accommodation letter that you can give professors at the beginning of each semester. This is likely going to be a shorter document, like a lot shorter than what you're used to for a Section 504 plan. And it shouldn't disclose that you have diabetes. It would only disclose that you generally have a condition that entitles you to certain accommodations, and it would list the accommodations out. You can voluntarily choose to disclose your diabetes to your professor, but you don't have to. Sometimes when I was in college, I would disclose I have diabetes, especially if maybe sometimes the class was related to diabetes. So it was just personally I would share that, or maybe they saw my insulin pump, but you shouldn't feel pressured to do this. I would also consider bringing a copy of your letter with you on test days as a precaution, or just keep maybe a copy of it on your phone if needed. Sometimes there's a teaching assistant or somebody else is covering the class, and it's good just in case of emergencies. So with your accommodation letter and whatever accommodations you're granted, you're the one who's responsible for informing your professor that you have these accommodations and also keeping them updated. So this is things like if you have an accommodation that allows you to have some sort of assignment extension, if you have a blood glucose emergency, you need to provide notice to your professor as much as reasonable. And also, if you're planning to use an accommodation for exams, it's generally your responsibility to schedule those exams, especially if the exams are scheduled. Sometimes accommodated testing is done in a different facility. I also encourage you to write down deadlines, again, especially for exams if you have to test in a different facility for accommodated testing. And a sample letter of accommodation, you can review that to see what yours might look like at our ADA College Guide. So a few more reminders. Remember that accommodations are individualized. So you might have different accommodations compared to your friend. Also, continue communicating with your disability services office and have a relationship with whatever officer or staff member is assigned to you. If you're having issues and feeling like your current plan isn't meeting your needs, let them know. Accommodations are also generally renewed each semester, so you need to remember to have those check-in meetings and renew your accommodations as needed. Educate is another step. Hopefully your accessibility office or disability office is aware of the diabetes basics and anti-discrimination requirements, but they're not always familiar with diabetes. So be prepared to educate the staff member on your needs and your circumstances. You also might want to educate your RA, roommates, teammates, and other individuals to learn how to recognize and treat low blood glucose emergencies. Because like we discussed earlier, colleges don't have to have trained personnel available to give students glucagon or emergency care, like you might have been used to in high school. But these are some other steps you can take to stay safe. And some other school resources that you should consider. One, check out everything your school has to offer, especially your like disability service office if you're registered with them. Some might have private study areas. Others even have like tutoring opportunities for people registered with the office, mental health supports. When I was in college, my university had a lot of diabetes-specific programming as a research college, and I looked around and they actually had free therapy and mental health services for people with diabetes. So you never know what's out there, so it's good to familiarize yourself as much as you can with what your school has to offer. So here's some other considerations. One, you should figure out your diabetes care plan. One thing to think about is where do you get your diabetes medication and supplies? Maybe your parent or guardian handled that before, and if you're now responsible, you'll need to figure out a new plan. Some people choose to find a pharmacy near their college, others might mail their supplies from home or just drive home if they live close. That's a personal decision for you to discuss with your healthcare provider and your family if necessary. Also consider if you need a new endocrinologist or if you would like a local doctor in case something comes up, especially if you're far away from home. Make sure to keep plenty of snacks and supplies in your dorm room. And a good tip for this is why we've mentioned having a good relationship and sharing with your roommate potentially about diabetes and what all it means. You don't want them accidentally eating your low blood sugar snacks or juice boxes. So make sure you have like a specific area for your diabetes supplies if you can. Another thing to think about is you might be walking a lot longer distances. Campuses can be really big and might be hilly, so that might have an impact on your blood sugar levels. So talk with your healthcare provider about that. Same with the dining halls. This is probably different than you're used to for eating and just having perhaps your dining hall looks more like a buffet. So just figuring that out are some things you should consider. And finally, having a sick day plan. This is always a good idea, but especially with diabetes. I know when I went to school, I would have like a sick day box with maybe like a can of soup and tissues and whatever else I might need, so I don't have to leave the dorm if I'm sick. But that can just be something that's helpful and gives you some ease of mind as you're starting school. So here's some more considerations. One is great to find a good support system. That could be friends. Maybe you already know some friends who are going with you to college and know your background. Maybe it's a new roommate, a professor, or a student organization. I've included below Diabetes Link, which used to be the College Diabetes Network, is one organization that focuses on peer support for college students and young adults with diabetes. So they may be able to connect you with fellow students with diabetes on campus or have a campus chapter. So that's something to consider if you want to get more involved. Also, if you're going out late at night, consider telling a friend you have diabetes and where you keep your emergency diabetes supplies so that you have that extra level of safety. So some other resources to recommend is one, of course, we've talked about the Going to College with Diabetes Self-Advocacy Guide. That's a good resource. We also have on our website is diabetes.org/college rights, where it includes the guide and other resources specifically for college students. And you can also always contact the American Diabetes Association at 1-800-DIABETES or email askada@diabetes.org, and somebody will respond with curated information based off your question. So in conclusion, diabetes and going to college with diabetes it's a big time and a lot of changes, but there's lots of college students out there with diabetes. And if you can get connected with the right resources on campus, it can be a big help in setting yourself up for success. in terms of academics and in your professional and personal life. So now we're going to move on to some questions. I'm going to check the chat box.
Emma, first question we have is, I never had a 504 plan or accommodations plan. Does this mean that I can't get accommodations while in college?
Well, that's a good question. We hear that concern sometimes. Maybe you were diagnosed with diabetes later in life, maybe while you were in college or right before college, or maybe you were homeschooled, or for whatever reason, you've just not had a formal written accommodation plan before. And that's okay. You can still apply for accommodations at any time, and that won't change your legal rights and your ability to request them. While it's true that sometimes having the form or documentation might make it just slightly simpler because you can just share those former documents showing you had accommodations. It won't stop your rights and ability to receive them. Further, sometimes people enter college and they think they have everything under control or have great professors, so for another reason, just decided not to apply for accommodations their first semester or second semester. That doesn't stop you either. It's never too late. You can always go to your disability services office later on and get the accommodations you need.
Great. Emma, can the doctor on campus prescribe insulin?
So this might depend on, I don't know what your campus situation looks like. Some colleges, most have some sort of health clinic, so you'll have to see what your health clinic protocols are and policies, because they might have a clinic where you can get set up with a provider to receive insulin. But it's also discuss this with your provider, your setup now before you go off to college, whether you're seeing a primary care provider or an endocrinologist, and they can help you with that transition and figure out the plan to where you're going to be receiving your insulin later on.
Another question, how do I deal with a professor who isn't honoring my accommodation letter?
This can be a difficult and frustrating conversation and circumstance. I know I've had some professors who didn't have much knowledge about diabetes. Maybe they get upset because they hear an insulin pump beep and don't know what it is, or just don't want to honor your accommodations even without knowing what they're for. I would say if this is the case, a good first step is to go to your disability services office. They likely have experience in this and can maybe, perhaps their method will be emailing a copy of your accommodation letter to the professor and reminding them that they legally must respect your accommodations that you're giving them. So they can be a good first step in helping with that conflict. If you've told your professor you have diabetes and feel comfortable doing that, you always have the personal right to share what you want and educate your professor. Tell them that it's an insulin pump, not a cell phone. Explain those sort of things. But it's of course not a requirement. You shouldn't feel pressured to tell your professor personal medical information. So that's why a good first step could just go to your disability services office if you still want to remain anonymous and not have to explain things to your professor.
Great. And I have looks like one last question. I am taking online college classes. Am I still eligible for accommodations?
You still have the right to request reasonable accommodations. But this is a good example of how accommodations might differ, and it's an individualized process. So it might look different than a friend who is taking fully in-person classes. How this could look like if you're taking online classes, you may still request accommodations for things like exams and having a break during exams or extended time, assignment extensions, things like that. You, of course, won't have necessarily the accommodation of food or drink or like physical accommodations if that's not needed with online classes, but that's a conversation for you to have with your disability services office, and you still have that right to make that request, whether you're just taking one online class or your entire program is online.
Okay. Another question. What is your recommendation on who should be trained to recognize and treat a low, including the potential administration of glucagon?
It's a completely personal decision, but I chose to train my roommates when I first moved in on glucagon administration, and I let my RA know at least the warning signs of low blood sugar and how to call, like who to call if something happens. And that was something what made me feel safe. Maybe you're a student athlete and you're going to be, you have a coach, that might be somebody you can go to and train on diabetes and emergency care. But again, it's completely personal and whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Thank you. Um, that looks like that's all the questions. So if you want to wrap up, that would be great.
Okay. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your day for the ADA's Back to School virtual session. We hope this guidance and information provided to you has been helpful. And also congratulations if you're entering the college, either the application process or starting your first year. This is a big, exciting step. Please know that the American Diabetes Association is here for you. A link to the session will be available along with the rest of our back to school virtual sessions if you'd like to watch and share any of them with friends or family members. For more information and specific guidance about Safe at School and college and diabetes, please go to diabetes.org/college rights. And again, thank you for attending and all you do to support children or college students with diabetes. And again, as mentioned earlier, please check out our other resources and feel free to call 1-800-DIABETES or email askada@diabetes.org if you have any additional questions after this session. Thank you so much.